All right, how do we go about yanking this object off of the background and moving it around inside Photoshop? Well, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here, Command minus or Control minus. And, what I want to make sure that you understand at this point is that our photograph here, the photograph of all the rusted metal parts, is flat. There's no depth to it, right? It's just a simple flat photograph. So as soon as I make a selection, though, I can then pull something away from the other objects inside the photo. It could be any kind of a photo that you have here. And I can move it around while I have the marching ants. As soon as I get rid of the marching ants, then it's kind of like everything reflattens, if that makes sense. So while I have a selection, the object floats on top of the photo. As soon as I get rid of the selection, everything flattens down again. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to zoom in just a touch here. What I'll do is I'll now switch over, I'll flip over to the Move tool just by hitting the V key on my keyboard. Of course, over on my washer there, I still have my marching ants, which is great. Well, check this out. With the Move tool now selected inside the toolbox, quite literally clicking and dragging yanks that object, that selected object, off of the background. And now this object literally, as I mentioned just a moment ago, floats over top of all of the other objects inside my image, right? Which is great because now I can, move them around, position them where I want them. And then this is kind of the wacky part. Let's say, for example, I drop them over top of this weird sort of looking nut there, this sort of hexagonal looking nut here. If I were to get rid of the marching ants at this point, then the washer would flatten on top of the hexagonal nut. So anyway, here's what I want to do. This sort of, I don't even know what this is, a rusted sort of cylindrical object here, that's going to serve as part of our eye for our face. And the washer that you and I selected is going to be sort of the eyeball or like the iris. So what I want to do is I want to position the washer something like this on top of this wacky looking cylindrical rusted metal object. Something like this is what I'm after. I hope this makes sense. Now again, don't forget, while I still have marching ants, I can move this guy around. I can position him, right? Now what I want to do is I want to get rid of my selection. I want to deselect, if you will, because I'm happy with my positioning here, my repositioning of the washer. Now to get rid of your marching ants, there's a bunch of different things that you can do, but probably the easiest thing to do is to simply head up to the select menu and then choose deselect, or I always use my keyboard shortcut, Command D or Control D over on the Windows side, and that gets rid of those marching ants. Now, if I try and click and drag on my washer, I can't because you can see here Photoshop is telling me that the layer is locked. We'll talk about layers a little bit later on, but essentially everything's locked down, everything's flattened. So I no longer have that floating selection. So you want to be really careful that you've positioned your object correctly before you deselect, before you get rid of your marching ants. All right, now the next thing that I want to do is I want to grab the entire eye for our face, and I want to move them over onto the right-hand side of our document, that sort of open white blank area that you and I had created earlier. So I'm going to go back to the elliptical marquee tool over inside the toolbox, and I'm going to try and select this whole piece here, both parts here. And again, you're just kind of hoping for the best here. You click and drag, you hope for the best, you kind of cross your fingers as you're doing it here. Don't forget I can use my space bar to help me along here as I make my selection. Now, my selection is by no means perfect. I'm getting a lot of white in the selection here as well. That's fine because he's going to wind up on a white background, so it shouldn't be too bad here. But make sure you have both objects, both this rusted cylinder and the rusted metal washer. And I'll zoom back out, Command minus or Control minus. And I'll flip back over to my Move tool. And now I simply want to take this selection and drag him all the way over onto the right-hand side of the document, as I say. Something like that. All right. Now, unless you want to create a Cyclops face, which I guess you could if you wanted to, you want to have two eyes in your cartoonish face that we're making here. So what I now want to do is I want to take this guy and duplicate him. And doing so is very easy. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. All I'm going to do, I'm still on the Move tool, is I'm going to bring my cursor inside the selection, hold down Alt or Option, check out the cursor there. The cursor changes. It now becomes a double arrow almost, suggesting that if I click and drag, I would create a duplicate of my selection, whatever that selection might be. And that's really all there is to it. Perfect. All right. Now that we've moved the eyes over onto the right-hand side, we've duplicated the eye there, so we have two eyes. I'd like you to get rid of your marching ants. Do you remember your keyboard shortcut for getting rid of your selection? Control D or Command D. Perfect.